A diamond sitting in a ring right now that your grandmother paid $5,000 for in 1995 can be made inside a factory in less time than it takes to grow a tomato. And that factory in China can make 1,000 of them a day. That one fact changes everything you think you know about diamonds. For most of the last 100 years, the diamond industry was built on a single idea. Diamonds are rare. Not just rare. Incredibly, impossibly rare. The kind of rare that took the Earth 1 billion years to create. The kind of rare that only exists deep under volcanoes, waiting to be discovered by people brave enough to dig for them. That story was so convincing that entire countries built their whole economies on it. Millions of people bought into it on the most emotional day of their lives, and one company sat at the center of all of it, pulling the strings, controlling everything. That company is De Beers. And right now, in 2026, De Beers is being sold off. The parent company that owns it decided it was worth less than a copper mine and is walking away. Countries that trusted the diamond price to fund their schools, hospitals, and roads are watching their budgets collapse in real time. The engagement ring you might buy today is worth a fraction of what your parents paid for theirs. And a province in central China that most people in the Western world have never even heard of is the reason for all of it. This is the story of how one of the biggest and most successful illusions in human history got crushed by a room full of machines humming in Henan, China. But to understand how that happened, you first have to understand just how completely De Beers controlled the world's mind when it came to diamonds. Because what they built was not just a business. It was a masterpiece of psychological manipulation, the kind that gets taught in business schools, the kind that made people feel guilty for even considering a fake diamond as an engagement ring. And it worked for over a century. Let's start at the beginning. Before the 1930s, most people did not give each other diamond rings when they got engaged. That is just a fact. Engagement rings existed, but they were made of all kinds of stones: rubies, sapphires, emeralds. Diamonds were one option among many. They were not yet the symbol. They were not yet the thing you had to buy. Then in 1947, a copywriter named Francis Garrity, working for an advertising agency hired by De Beers, came up with 4 words that changed shopping behavior for the next 75 years. A diamond is forever. Those 4 words were genius, not because they described something true, but because they planted an idea so deep in people's minds that it felt true. A diamond is forever means your love is forever. It means if you love her, you buy her a diamond. It means if you don't buy her a diamond, you don't really love her. And if anyone ever suggested that a diamond loses its value the second you walk out of the store, that person was attacking love itself. By controlling the mines and distribution channels, De Beers could stockpile diamonds and release them slowly to manipulate the supply and keep prices high. They created artificial scarcity, a classic case of supply-side economics tailored to marketing. They did not want diamonds flooding the second-hand market, so they trained people to believe diamonds had no resale value. Think about that. They told people their diamonds were not worth reselling, not because it was true, but because if everyone started selling their old diamonds, the illusion of scarcity would fall apart instantly. From its founding in 1888 until the start of the 21st century, De Beers controlled 80 to 85% of rough diamond distribution worldwide and was considered a monopoly. That means one company decided how many diamonds came out of the ground every year, how many got cut and polished, and what price they sold for. If a mine somewhere tried to sell outside the De Beers system, De Beers would flood the market with similar diamonds, crash the price, and force that mine back into line. It was control on a scale that is almost hard to believe. Here is a number that puts it into perspective. In the 1980s, if you wanted to buy a 1-carat diamond engagement ring in the United States, you were going to pay somewhere between $2,000 and $4,000 depending on quality. That is in 1980s dollars, which were worth a lot more than today's dollars. The price was not set by supply and demand. It was set by De Beers, telling the world what diamonds were worth, and the world believed them. That system worked for a very, very long time. But here is the thing about systems built on stories. The moment someone figures out how to make the thing the story is about, the story dies. And that is exactly what happened in central China. Section 2. The province that changed everything. Most people who have heard of China can name Shanghai, Beijing, or maybe Shenzhen. Very few people in the West have heard of Henan. Henan is a province in central China. It has a population of about 100 million people, which makes it one of the most populated places on Earth. It is historically famous for farming, the Yellow River, and ancient Chinese civilization. For most of modern history, it was considered one of China's less developed interior provinces. Today, Henan is single-handedly responsible for the collapse of the global diamond market. The story of how that happened does not start with jewelry. It starts with factories that needed to cut things. Back in the 1950s, China was in the middle of building its entire industrial base from scratch. You needed diamond-tipped cutting tools to machine metal parts. You needed diamond drill bits to bore through rock. You needed diamond-coated grinding discs to shape hard materials. And all of that required industrial diamonds. Tiny, often cloudy, brownish crystals that nobody would ever put in a ring, but that were absolutely essential for manufacturing. China decided to grow their own. Over the following decades, the factories in Henan got very, very good at making these industrial diamonds. Companies that most people outside China have never heard of, names like Zhongnan Diamond, Huanghe Whirlwind, and Liliang Diamond, built up what would eventually become the most complete and efficient diamond-making supply chain on the planet. They mastered the machines. They trained the workers, they brought the costs down, they got faster and faster. By recent years, China accounted for roughly 3/4 of global lab-grown diamond output, making it the supply center of the category. But that is getting ahead of the story, because for a long time, nobody in the jewelry world was paying attention to Henan. The stuff coming out of those factories was ugly industrial material. It was not going anywhere near a ring. It was going into saw blades and drill bits. Then the machines kept getting better. There are two main ways to grow a diamond in a lab. The first way is called high pressure, high temperature, which does exactly what it sounds like. You take carbon, you crush it under enormous pressure, and heat it to extreme temperatures. And you recreate the conditions deep inside the earth where natural diamonds form over millions of years. Henan became the global king of this method. The factories there had the presses, the expertise, and the scale to produce diamonds this way faster and cheaper than anywhere else in the world. The second way is newer, sleeker, and even more powerful. It is called chemical vapor deposition. Instead of crushing carbon under a press, you put a seed crystal inside a vacuum chamber, fill the chamber with a carbon-rich gas, and hit it with microwave energy. The carbon atoms float down and stick to the seed one layer at a time, slowly building up a diamond from scratch. It is like 3D printing, but for the hardest substance on Earth. The stones that come out of this process tend to be cleaner, clearer, and better colored than most diamonds coming from HPHT presses. That matters a lot in the jewelry world, where color and clarity are two of the main things that determine how much a diamond is worth. Here is what the engineers in Henan realized at some point, probably quietly, probably without much fanfare. The same machines they had been using to make rough industrial crystals could, with some adjustments, make gem-quality stones. Stones that were chemically identical to the ones being dug out of the ground in Botswana and Russia. Stones that a trained gemologist could not tell apart from a mined diamond without specialized equipment. The pivot to jewelry was not some grand master plan. It was more like a side effect of getting really, really good at something. The CVD method involves growing diamonds from a carbon-rich gas in a vacuum chamber, and the technique allows for the creation of diamonds with exceptional clarity and color, rivaling those mined from the earth. The scale of production in Henan is now such that it is starting to exert considerable influence on the global market. And the scale is the part that breaks your brain a little when you actually look at the numbers. One facility in Henan, a company called SF Diamond, opened a major CVD production site with the ability to produce 700,000 carats of gem-quality diamond every single year. One facility, 700,000 carats. To put that in perspective, a typical 1-carat engagement ring diamond weighs about 0.2 grams. That one facility can produce the equivalent weight of more than 140,000 kilograms of gem diamonds per year. And SF Diamond is just one of dozens of manufacturers operating in the same province. China produced over 22 million gem-quality carats in 2023, accounting for more than 70% of global output, with 80% of capacity concentrated in Henan province. Now compare that to the entire global natural diamond mining industry. All the mines in Botswana, Russia, Canada, South Africa, and Australia combined produce roughly 120 million carats of rough per year, but only a fraction of that is gem quality. And it takes billions of dollars of mining equipment, environmental permits, and years of digging to get those stones out of the ground. The Henan factories were growing the same stones in weeks inside buildings using electricity. As Chinese capacity surged, wholesale prices dropped sharply across sizes and qualities. That is great for consumers and disruptive for mined diamond pricing. Between 2020 and 2023, global lab-grown diamond production capacity expanded by more than 300%. That is a tripling of supply in 3 years. And when supply triples that fast for something that was previously held artificially scarce, what happens to the price is both predictable and brutal. Here is how brutal it was. Section 3. The price falls off a cliff. In January of 2020, if you wanted to buy a 1-carat lab-grown diamond, you were going to pay somewhere around $3,400 at retail. That is still a lot of money, but it was already cheaper than a natural diamond of similar quality, which might cost you $5,000 to $6,000. That gap was about to become a canyon. By late 2024, that same 1-carat lab-grown diamond retailed for under $900. Not because the stone got worse. The stone was the same. The quality was the same. By 2025, a 1-carat lab-grown diamond averaged $1,000 or less, compared to around $4,200 for a natural 1-carat diamond. But here is the thing that should make your jaw drop. The retail price collapsing from $3,400 to under $900 is not even the most dramatic part of the story. The retail price only tells half the picture. The wholesale price, which is what the stores pay before they put their markup on top, fell even further. By early 2026, wholesale lab-grown diamonds were trading below $100 per carat. That is a 95% drop from where they started. 95%. To understand how insane that is, let me give you a comparison. Imagine if the price of a new car fell from $30,000 to $1,500. Not a used car with 100,000 miles on it. A brand new car with a full warranty, same model, same features. That is the scale of what happened to diamond prices. Now here is where it gets interesting in a frustrating way, depending on which side of the counter you are on. That 95% collapse in wholesale prices did not get passed on to consumers anywhere near that amount. By 2025, the proportion of lab-grown diamonds in global diamond jewelry sales exceeded 40%. However, Chinese enterprises had not benefited much from this growth. The Chinese factories that were doing all the work and taking all the risk were selling their stones for almost nothing. Meanwhile, the retailers in New York and London and Sydney were still charging close to what they always had. Analysts who track the jewelry industry estimated that retail stores were maintaining gross margins of 73 to 74% throughout the entire price collapse, just absorbing the savings from Chinese production instead of passing them to shoppers. Reports suggested that retail markups on lab-grown diamonds reached 300 to 500% in some cases by mid-2025. Think about what that means in practice. If the store paid $100 wholesale for a lab-grown diamond, they were still selling it to you for $400 or $500 or more. The stone cost the factory a fraction of what it used to. The store paid a fraction of what it used to. But your price at the counter barely moved. This is one of the most important parts of the story that gets lost in all the headlines about cheap diamonds. The production revolution happened in China. The profit from that revolution mostly ended up in retail margins. The consumer got some savings, but nowhere near as much as you might expect from a 95% wholesale price collapse. Now let's talk about what this did to the person who started it all. De Beers watched this coming. They were not asleep. They saw the lab-grown market building, and they tried to get ahead of it. In 2018, they launched a brand called Lightbox. The strategy was smart on paper. Instead of fighting lab-grown diamonds directly, De Beers would sell them at a deliberately low fixed price of $800 per carat. The idea was to train the market to see lab-grown diamonds as cheap fashion accessories, not real diamonds. By pricing them low themselves, they hoped to signal to everyone that lab-grown stones were not worth real money. But the Chinese factories were getting cheaper faster than De Beers could lower their price floor. By 2024, De Beers cut the Lightbox price to $500 per carat. It was not enough. Chinese peers cut prices much faster than Lightbox. As a result, the company accumulated losses of more than $120 million in 2 years. By May 2025, De Beers shut Lightbox down entirely. The financial damage to De Beers as a whole was severe in a way that is hard to overstate for a company that had operated as a global monopoly for over a century. De Beers' EBITDA loss for 2025 was $511 million, up from $25 million in 2024. In February 2026, parent company Anglo American wrote down De Beers for the third time in 2 years, this time by $2.3 billion. The company's book value is now estimated at just $2.3 billion, although just a few years ago it was several times higher. The total write-downs Anglo American took on De Beers across 2023, 2024, and 2025 added up to roughly $6.8 billion. The largest single charge came in 2024 at $2.9 billion. Natural diamond production fell 12% in 2025. The average realized price per carat recorded a 19% decline to $101 per carat in Q1 2026. And in the move that really signals the end of an era, Anglo American announced it is selling De Beers entirely. 100 years of diamond monopoly, and the parent company decided the whole business was less valuable than a copper mine. For the first time in over a century, De Beers has lost its stranglehold on diamond supply due to the rise of man-made alternatives. This has made the company an incredibly tough sell, with little to no interest from other mining companies. But De Beers is not the only casualty here, not even close. Section 4. Countries are going broke. There is a country in southern Africa called Botswana. Most people in the Western world do not know much about it. But here is what you need to know. Botswana is one of the great economic success stories of the 20th century, and diamonds are the reason. When Botswana gained independence from Britain in 1966, it was one of the poorest countries on earth. It had almost no paved roads. It had almost no infrastructure. Then in 1967, 1 year after independence, geologists found diamonds, lots of them. Over the next few decades, Botswana partnered with De Beers to build the most productive diamond mining operation in the world. The revenue from those mines funded schools, hospitals, roads, and a middle class that simply did not exist before. Botswana became what economists called a development miracle, a country that went from desperately poor to middle income in a single generation, largely because of diamonds. Diamonds account for approximately 25 to 30% of Botswana's GDP, with diamonds representing 70 to 80% of all export earnings. About one-third of government revenue comes directly from the diamond industry through taxes, royalties, and dividends, and diamonds generate three-quarters of the country's foreign exchange. When the diamond market collapsed, it hit Botswana like a truck. By the end of 2025, the country had already accumulated over 12 million carats of unsold diamonds, 85% above the norm. In March 2026, Standard & Poor's downgraded Botswana's credit rating to BBB- with a negative outlook due to declining diamond revenues. The budget deficit for 2026 to 2027 is projected to reach almost 9% of GDP. Think about what that means in human terms. The money that was supposed to pay teachers and doctors and fund government programs is not coming in because people are buying lab-grown diamonds from China instead of natural diamonds from Botswana's mines. Botswana did nothing wrong. They ran good mines. They managed their resources responsibly. They partnered with De Beers in good faith. And now a technology shift happening 8,000 kilometers away in Henan province is dismantling the economic foundation of an entire country. The Debswana joint venture, which is the partnership between the Botswana government and De Beers that runs the country's mines, cut output by 27%. That means thousands of people out of work. That means communities built around those mines losing their main source of income. That means a government scrambling to figure out how to fund basic services without the diamond revenue that everyone assumed would always be there. And now Botswana is in the middle of something almost absurd. The country wants to buy De Beers, the whole thing, or at least a controlling stake. The government of Botswana still wants to boost its 15% stake beyond 50%, with President Duma Boko publicly stating that ambition. More than 2/3 of De Beers rough stones are mined in Botswana. But here is the cruel twist. S&P just downgraded Botswana's credit rating, which makes it harder to borrow money, which makes it harder to afford to buy the company whose collapse is causing the problem in the first place. The IMF has warned that increasing its stake in the unprofitable company would exacerbate the already critical risks to the country's economy. But if Botswana does not maintain some control over De Beers, other investors might take over the mines and the country loses any influence over the thing its entire economy depends on. It is a trap that looks inescapable from the outside. Botswana is not alone in this. Russia has a company called Alrosa. It is the largest rough diamond producer in the world by volume. When diamond prices were high, Alrosa was enormously profitable. Then came the price collapse. Alrosa's net profit plunged 77% in 2024. The company announced plans to cut labor costs across its entire workforce of 35,000 people. Canada's Ekati diamond mine filed for creditor protection in mid-2026. Mines that made perfectly good business sense when natural diamonds had no real competition are now fighting for survival. The common thread in all of these stories is the same. An industry that was built on the assumption that diamonds could only come from the ground is now discovering what happens when that assumption turns out to be wrong. And it is not like this happened overnight. The writing was on the wall for anyone paying attention. The question is whether the dam has already broken or whether some version of the natural diamond story can survive. Let's talk about what this looks like from the other side of the counter. Section 5. What it means for everyone buying a diamond right now. If you went shopping for an engagement ring in the United States in 2019, lab-grown diamonds were a curiosity. Maybe 5% of engagement ring buyers were choosing them. The rest were still buying natural stones, often without knowing much about the alternative. Something shifted fast. Lab-grown diamonds have significantly disrupted the diamond jewelry industry, evolving from a niche to a mainstream choice, accounting for over 45% of U.S. engagement ring purchases by 2024. And by early 2026, that number was climbing toward 55 to 61%, depending on the source you look at. For the first time ever, more than half of couples reported their engagement ring features a lab-grown stone, according to the Knot's 2025 Real Weddings study. Lab-grown diamonds grew 40% since 2019, with the increasing popularity attributed to budget consciousness, perceived value, and ethical production practices. The generational shift is even more dramatic when you look at younger buyers specifically. 2/3 of Gen Z engagement ring purchasers opted for lab-grown diamonds, and consumers are using the savings from lower prices to buy bigger, with the average lab-grown engagement ring center stone increasing from 1.31 carats in 2019 to 2.45 carats in 2025. That last part is actually fascinating when you think about it. For decades, if you wanted a 2-carat engagement ring, you had to be pretty wealthy. A 2-carat natural diamond was a luxury that most people could not afford. Now 2 carats is the average for lab-grown buyers. Not the exception, the average. Because the same budget that used to buy you a smaller mined stone can now buy you a much larger, lab-grown stone that looks identical to the naked eye. This is where the conversation gets a little uncomfortable for a lot of people, because the question of whether lab-grown diamonds are a smart choice or a terrible one depends almost entirely on what you think a diamond is for. Here is the math that nobody wants to talk about. If you bought a 1-carat lab-grown diamond in 2020 for $3,500, that stone now retails new for around $800 or less. If you tried to sell it secondhand today, you might get 10 to 30% of what you paid, which means your $3,500 stone might resell for somewhere between $80 and $350. That is a brutal loss by any measure. Natural diamonds do better on resale. A GIA-certified natural stone can typically resell for up to 60% of what you paid retail. So the $5,000 natural diamond might get you $3,000 back if you needed to sell. That is still a loss, but it is a much smaller one. But here is the counterintuitive math that actually matters. A 2-carat natural diamond purchased for $29,500 and resold at 50% is a loss of about $14,750. A 2-carat lab-grown purchased for $2,800 and resold for effectively nothing is a total loss of $2,800. The cheaper stone, even when it loses everything, loses less in actual dollars. So the question is not really which diamond holds its value better in percentage terms. The question is what you are going to do with the money you saved by not buying the natural diamond. If you invest that difference, if you put it toward a house, a trip, anything else, you are probably better off with the lab-grown stone mathematically, even accounting for the difference in resale value. But a lot of people do not buy diamonds as investments. They buy them as symbols, and here is where the natural diamond industry is trying to make its last stand. The argument for natural diamonds in 2026 goes something like this. A lab-grown diamond can be made by anyone with the right machine. There will always be more of them. They have no scarcity, which means they have no long-term story. A natural diamond, on the other hand, took 1 billion years to form under conditions that can never be replicated for that specific stone. It came out of a particular mine on a particular day, and it is genuinely the only one of its kind. That rarity, the argument goes, is what gives it meaning beyond its chemical composition. Whether that argument lands depends entirely on the buyer. The retail jewelry industry is bifurcating. Lab-grown diamonds are becoming an accessible everyday luxury, while natural diamonds are repositioning as exclusive symbols of enduring value. The big jewelry chains have felt all of this in their numbers. Retailer inventory of lab-grown stones surged from high single digits in 2020 to close to 50% of total diamond inventory by 2026. Holding inventory that loses value every quarter creates a compounding problem on the balance sheet, and the bigger chains are starting to feel it. Pandora, which was already a massive jewelry company, dropped natural diamonds from its lineup entirely and pivoted to lab-grown. That is not a small thing. That is a major global brand making a complete commitment to one side of this divide. And James Allen, once a well-known independent online diamond brand, was folded into Blue Nile to consolidate costs as margins compressed across the industry. But now, here is the part of the story that almost nobody is talking about, because it just started happening in 2026, and it is going to reshape everything again. Section 6. The twist nobody saw coming. When the diamond price collapsed, the factories in Henan did not celebrate for long. The price war was so intense that by the time the dust settled, even the Chinese manufacturers were struggling. They had flooded the market so thoroughly that the price of their own product had fallen below a point where many of them were making real money. Several leading domestic enterprises such as Zhongbing Hongjian, Huanghe Whirlwind, and Liliang Diamond all experienced a double decline in revenue and profit. The market penetration rate of lab-grown diamonds is rising rapidly, but Chinese enterprises have not benefited much from this growth. The irony is almost painful. The factories that caused the price collapse got hurt by the price collapse. China's lab-grown diamond industry holds a deep industrial paradox. China does the hardest work, earns the thinnest margins, and makes the wedding dress for someone else to wear. 90% of rough stones are manufactured in China. 90% of polished stones are cut in India. And 90% of finished diamond jewelry is consumed in Europe and America. China built the machine. China runs the machine. And the profits mostly flow to people in other countries. In March 2026, something interesting happened. Leading Chinese lab-grown diamond producers, with Zhengzhou Huajing chief among them, began voluntarily raising rough prices by roughly 15%, breaking the long price decline stalemate. The industry was converging on a consensus that an unbounded race to the bottom would destroy the category. The factories were trying to stop digging their own grave. But the even bigger twist happened when some of these Henan factories looked up from the jewelry market entirely and noticed something. An entirely different industry was desperately screaming for exactly what they knew how to make. Artificial intelligence. Here is something about AI chips that most people do not know. The biggest problem facing the AI industry right now is not the software. It is not the algorithms. It is heat. Modern AI chips, the kind that run the large language models and image generators that everyone is using, generate extraordinary amounts of heat. We are talking about chips running at over 1,000 watts in some cases. The heat density coming off those chips is comparable to a rocket engine nozzle, which sounds insane until you look at the actual measurements. If you cannot cool those chips fast enough, they slow down. They degrade. They fail. And in data centers that cost hundreds of millions of dollars to build, chip failure is catastrophic. The best cooling material known to science is diamond. Not the diamond you wear on your finger, but chemically it is the same thing. Diamond has the highest thermal conductivity of any known material at 2,000 to 2,200 watts per meter, Kelvin, 5 times that of copper, and 8 times that of aluminum. A thin layer of lab-grown diamond placed between a chip and its cooling system can dramatically lower the chip's operating temperature. And lower temperature means longer lifespan, better performance, and more computing power from the same hardware. What truly accelerated this narrative was NVIDIA. In February 2026, NVIDIA announced that its next-generation GPU would utilize a diamond composite plus liquid cooling scheme, becoming a key catalyst for the lab-grown diamond market. A diamond materials company called Chaoying Diamond confirmed that its diamond copper composite material has passed NVIDIA's supply chain verification and can be used to solve cooling for high-power density AI chips. NVIDIA's H200 GPU uses a diamond silicon carbide composite material with a 40% increase in peak computing power. Let that sink in for a second. The same factories in Henan that cratered the jewelry diamond market are now being courted by the biggest technology companies on Earth as essential suppliers for the most important computing infrastructure of our time. In March 2026, Several cultivated diamond factories in Henan issued price increase notices, raising the price of large single crystal products by 15%. The reason stated was not a recovery of jewelry demand, but a significant increase in the prices of equipment and raw materials, which means the cost of making chip heat sinks is rising. China accounts for 95% of the world's synthetic diamond production capacity, and global chip giants cannot avoid Henan. The most valuable use of a diamond now may not be to be worn on the hand, but to be placed inside NVIDIA's GPUs. Jensen Huang's meeting with Henan Chaoying Diamond Technology was keenly noticed by the industry, sending a clear signal that the computing power industry was urgently seeking an ultimate solution to tame the fierce heat flow of next-generation GPUs. So here is where things stand as of mid-2026. The Henan factories killed the luxury diamond market. Now they might be about to become critical infrastructure for the global AI industry. And China controls 95% of the capacity to make this material, which means any country that wants to build competitive AI data centers is going to need to buy from Henan. The province that nobody in the Western world had heard of a decade ago is now at the center of two of the biggest economic stories on Earth: the collapse of the diamond monopoly and the rise of artificial intelligence computing. That is a remarkable pivot for a region that started by making industrial saw blades. Section 7. Where does this all end? That is the question everyone in the diamond and jewelry industry is trying to answer, and honest analysts do not fully agree. On the lab-grown side, there is very little debate about the direction. In 2026, the overall price of lab-grown diamonds was expected to fall by an additional 20 to 30% compared to 2024, primarily due to increased productivity from CVD factories in China and India. The production capacity is still growing. The costs per carat are still falling. Unless something changes dramatically in the technology or the regulatory environment, there is no natural bottom to the price of a lab-grown diamond. Eventually, the price stabilizes at something close to the cost of production, plus the machines, plus the electricity, plus a thin profit margin. For natural diamonds, the picture is more complicated, and analysts genuinely disagree. On one side, you have people who point to supply. Natural diamond supply is near its lowest levels since the 1980s. Mines are closing. New mines are not being found at the same rate as old ones are being depleted. If supply is shrinking and there is even modest demand for natural diamonds from people who care about the origin story, prices could stabilize or even recover. Natural diamond prices remained relatively stable for the past 18 months, with modest fluctuations driven by mining output and luxury demand cycles. Some premium lab-grown stones also found a price floor by late 2025. The years of double-digit annual price drops may be over for the very top-quality stones on both sides. On the other side, the buyers who historically drove natural diamond demand in Asia, especially China, have largely switched to other things. Chinese luxury consumers who might have bought diamond jewelry a decade ago are buying gold, jade, and experiences instead. The romantic marketing that De Beers ran so successfully in America for decades never took the same route in China. And without the Chinese luxury buyer, the natural diamond market loses one of its most important growth engines. Earlier in 2026, De Beers announced it would cut diamond prices again, repeating a cut in 2024, to try to boost demand. That is not the move of a company that thinks the premium can hold. That is the move of a company trying to keep buyers interested at any price. Meanwhile, the question of who buys De Beers remains unresolved and genuinely dramatic. Reports indicate De Beers has been valued at approximately $8 billion, though the prevailing weakness in rough diamond markets may influence final transaction pricing. Botswana wants a controlling stake, but may not be able to afford it. Angola's State Diamond Company has offered to buy the whole thing. Former De Beers CEO Gareth Penny is leading a private investment group trying to acquire it and reimagine it as a boutique luxury business rather than a mass market supplier. As of mid-2026, the Gareth Penny De Beers bid remains the frontrunner in an open and unresolved competitive process. The outcome of that sale will tell us a lot about whether the industry thinks there is a future for natural diamonds as a luxury asset, or whether it is essentially a managed decline. Here is what the numbers suggest when you step back and look at the whole picture. The diamond monopoly that De Beers built lasted for about a century because they controlled supply. They could not control what China decided to do with its factories. Nobody could. The moment it became technically possible to grow a gem-quality diamond in a lab and commercially feasible to do it at massive scale, the story of diamond scarcity was over. You cannot unsee that. You cannot unknow that. A stone that took the Earth 1 billion years to form is chemically identical to a stone that took a factory in Henan 3 weeks to grow. That is just true, and all the marketing in the world cannot make it untrue. What the natural diamond industry is left with is not scarcity, it is origin. And whether people value origin enough to pay 5, 10, or 20 times more for the same stone is ultimately a question about human psychology, not chemistry. For some buyers, the answer will always be yes. A diamond pulled from the ground in Botswana carries a story, a geological timestamp, a physical piece of the earth that no machine can replicate. For those buyers, the price premium is real, and the demand will persist. For a growing majority of buyers, especially younger ones who grew up in a world where you can stream any song, watch any movie, and print almost anything, the idea that one physical object is inherently more meaningful than a chemically identical one because of where it came from is just not compelling enough to justify a tenfold price difference. After the industry ran its internal price war to the extreme, a spontaneous correction began. In March 2026, leading Chinese producers began voluntarily raising rough prices, breaking the long price decline stalemate. That might be the first sign that the lab-grown market is reaching something like maturity. Prices are not going to zero. There is a floor, but it is nowhere near where the diamond industry was when China started scaling up. And for anyone who bought a lab-grown diamond at peak prices a few years ago and is now looking at their ring and wondering what it is worth, the answer is complicated. It is worth what it means to you. As jewelry, as a symbol, as the thing you chose on one of the most important days of your life, it is worth exactly what you felt it was worth when you put it on your finger. That value does not depreciate. As a financial asset, that is a different story. And the lesson of the last 6 years is that almost nobody in the jewelry industry, the mining industry, or the media told that story clearly until it was already too late for the people who needed to hear it. A province in central China that most diamond buyers will never visit changed all of this. The factories keep running. The machines keep growing diamonds. The price keeps falling. And the 100-year story that De Beers told the world, the story that a diamond is forever, is bumping up against a reality that no advertising slogan can fix. The diamonds coming out of Henan are real. Every atom in them is carbon, arranged in the same crystal structure as the most expensive stone in a jewelry store window. The difference between them and a mined diamond is a story. And right now, that story is being rewritten in a language that most of the Western world does not speak, by engineers in a Chinese province most people have never heard of. The prices are not coming back. The question now is what gets built in their place. That is the full picture of how China crushed diamond prices by 95%, and why the recovery, if it ever comes, is going to look nothing like what came before. If this kind of story is what you come here for, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss one. We cover the real economics behind commodities, markets, and industries every week, and there is always more going on beneath the surface than the headlines show. I want to leave you with one question to think about and drop in the comments below. If you found out that a lab-grown diamond and a mined diamond are chemically identical, and a jeweler could not tell them apart without a machine, Would you still pay 10 times more for the natural one? There is no right answer. But the fact that different generations are answering it so differently is exactly why this story matters.